I know what you're doing here. You saw my very provocative title and thumbnail and came to comment. No doubt you're either commenting to agree with me or to yell at me in the comment section below. But before you do so, let me just explain myself and maybe give a couple of disclaimers. So the first disclaimer I want to give is I know I did a video recently and it's picked up to a lot of views. Thank you so much, you guys all who clicked on it and commented on it, where my main point was that depicting something negative in media is not promoting and that people need to understand that. But I tried to be nuanced in my conversation in saying that, you know, it's true that there are definitely times when you can criticize something for actually inadvertently depicting something negative as positive, or for something being a character assassination and you're talking about a work of fiction. So if you're about to come down in the comments and yell at me for that, I still stand by what I said about depicting is not promoting, but that does not mean that there cannot be times when a work of fiction is actually either depicting something negative as positive or just doing something that inadvertently makes you feel uncomfortable and that you feel is wrong for the characters. And that's kind of what I'm getting into in this video. You will have to watch to the end to see the point I'm ultimately going to make. My second disclaimer is that I am making this video because I did a couple community posts on it and people said you should just make a video about this topic. And so because of those people, I am now making this video. So if you're mad at me for this, my commenters said I should make this video, and so it's on them too. Okay, so let's get into the topic. Once again, I would advise listen to the end to hear the ultimate point I'm going to make. So I have been a comic reader for 10 years now. I have read a lot of comics. I know a lot of comic book history. I even got a job once that was based on the fact that I had a lot of knowledge of comics, so I know what I'm talking about. And there's been a lot of great storylines in comics, but a lot of weird things as well. And one of the weird things I want to talk about is in comics, sometimes there will be these relationships. It's just popped up occasionally more than once where there is a very, very wide age gap between characters and between two characters that you can't really see together. And you just feel like it's not so much that this thing is happening naturally and more that this seems like it's just the writer inserting a fantasy into this couple. Now, the most famous one of these relationships, and once again, we're talking about comic book media here, is Batman and Batgirl. This is currently a very hated relationship. It's probably the most hated, one of the most hated relationships that has ever been tried in Batman, but it wasn't always this way. Now, let me explain the history. Batman and Batgirl were never a thing in the comics, never. Batgirl is typically portrayed as either a college-age girl, that is her most normal general portrayal, or sometimes she's been portrayed as a teenager. She is a sidekick of Batman, but she also does her own thing. She has her own life, but she, in terms of having a love interest, she is most commonly associated with Dick Grayson, Robin, the first Robin, Nightwing, who is Batman's adopted son and original protege. But in the Batman the Animated Series, they started to tease this Batman-Batgirl relationship happening. They started off with Batgirl having a crush on Batman, which, fine, it just seems to be a normal thing that someone might have on a fantasy figure like that. But throughout that show, they just portrayed Batgirl and Dick Grayson, Barbara Gordon and Dick Grayson, as they normally would, and they had a lot of chemistry. They had an entire made-for-TV movie where they had to get Batgirl back from Mr. Freeze, and they were really building up this relationship between Dick Grayson and Barbara. They broke up at one point, and then it seemed like Barbara wanted to get them back together. But then it started to get odd because as the series went on and they started making more content for these characters, they started to make it seem like Batman and Batgirl would be a thing. And this is super odd once again because Batgirl up to this point had just had a relationship, and a very important relationship, with Batman's, for all intents and purposes, his son, his adopted son. And it gets weird because in this show it directly acknowledges that Bruce Wayne has known Barbara Gordon since she was a very small child.
Barbara, come in. You've grown.
And later in the show, when you get to stuff like Mystery of the Batwoman or Batman Beyond, it outright says that Batgirl left Dick Grayson, Batman's son, for his father, and that is what separated that relationship and why they were not a team anymore. And that always was very odd to me. I was like, why are you doing a love triangle between essentially a father, his adopted son, and that adopted son's college-aged girlfriend. It never ever sat well with me. But back in the day, years and years and years and years ago at this point, people used to say to anyone who didn't like the Batman, Batgirl, Nightwing triangle that, oh, you're just like, age differences between Batman and Batgirl, they don't matter. This is fine. You shouldn't criticize. You shouldn't think that this is creepy. And I'm like, and that was like the big thing that I thought was a stain on the Batman animated series DCAU thing, because I just thought that was so strange, even as there were people who would say you shouldn't judge that, it's just fine. But here's the thing, behind the scenes, it seemed that Bruce Timm, who was the producer of Batman the Animated Series, just really had a thing to have Batman and Batgirl be in this relationship, and that's why it seemed like straight up retconning at a point to make her write off her relationship as Dick Grayson as nothing but puppy love when they had not written it that way. And it just seemed that Bruce Timm really had a thing for putting these two characters together, even though no one could really see it happening, and context made it creepy, honestly, even though, once again, there were defenders of it. But years later, there was a comic that came out that was written by Bruce Timm, and it was the creepiest thing ever, and it's the worst Batman comic I've ever heard of, where Bruce Timm tried to retcon it as canon to the Batman the Animated Series that Bruce Wayne had gotten Barbara Gordon pregnant when she was supposed to be engaged to Nightwing, and she had miscarried, and that scandal had broken up the relationship between these three characters, and that is absolutely gross. It is the grossest storyline that they have ever involved Batman in. I love all three of these characters. They would never do anything like that. You should never have written something like that. But this comic just kind of exposed the sort of perviness of this relationship and the sort of mindset of Bruce Timm. Bruce Timm, great artist, but if you have seen any of his behind the scenes art, which I can't show on here because it's too not safe for work, he is kind of a pervy guy, to say the least. But this comic kind of flew under the radar because it was very under the radar. Not a lot of people saw it, and to that day, a lot of people were still defending Batman and Batgirl because they hadn't seen that comic. And I said it's creepy and weird, and anybody who talked like me, we would kind of get shamed by these other people saying that don't judge, don't judge. But then the Batman Killing Joke adaptation was to come out, and in trailers they teased that they were going to do the Batman-Batgirl relationship, and Bruce Timm was involved with this project as the producer. And once again, I thought, I don't like that, but people said, but there's precedent. This happened in the DCAU. You shouldn't judge this. It's going to be fine. But you see, Bruce Timm, who had always seemed to have some kind of a weird fetish for this relationship, he was finally getting a movie that was not on the constraints of a kid's show's rating, which the other stuff was largely encapsulated by. He was doing an R-rated animated project now, and now he could finally explore Batman and Batgirl to the fullest extent that he wanted to. And what he did was to sort of prelude to the Killing Joke story to extend it, where Batgirl is just objectified throughout the entire story, where she's lusting after Batman, who is much older than her, who is best friends with her dad, and it's just a very, I'll just say it's sexually charged thing, and it came off as very creepy, and had very infamously a very awkward sex scene on top of a rooftop, and this sort of thing just caught fire into this massive controversy, and people blew back against the Batman Killing Joke film, and it became just either cringed at and hated and laughed at. And finally, all those people who kept saying, you can't judge Batman and Batgirl, you can't criticize them, shut up. Because from that moment on, this movie came out all the way back in 2016. From that moment on, Batman and Batgirl is considered a taboo relationship. You don't do it. It is creepy and gross. In fact, even in DC circles, if you want to refer to something really bad that happened, and probably in, something really gratuitously sexual that shouldn't have happened, they say, oh, it's a Killing Joke moment. That is to reference the tarnished and offensively bad Killing Joke adaptation. And once again, Batman and Batgirl does not happen in anything anymore. They did a relationship, I think, in the Lego Batman movie with Batgirl aged up, but it's considered an off-limits relationship. You don't do it because of what Bruce Timm did. And like, it was all, but here's my problem, is I was like, it shouldn't have taken people that long. It shouldn't have taken something something as drastic as the Killing Joke thing for them to have realized this relationship is pretty messed up. It was already there from the beginning. It was pretty clear that this relationship wasn't happening for any other reason than the writer's self-insert fantasy. I just kind of felt like it's Bruce Timm wanting to fantasize about an attractive, college-age girl just throwing herself at a guy his age. That's what it always felt like to me, and there is a lot of precedent for that because Bruce Timm is known to be kind of a perv, if you are at all familiar with his work. So that is the tale of Batman and Batgirl, and it should be, and it's very important to what I'm going to get at. And once again, there has been other relationships like this in comics. If you are at all familiar with Teen Titans, and I am not a Teen Titans expert, but even I know this tale. So there's a character in Teen Titans called Terry Long, and he is the boyfriend, future husband of Wonder Girl. And people always thought this character was strange because he's portrayed as a bit older than the Teen Titans. He's a college professor, a bit older than the girl he is dating slash married to, but he's kind of unlikable. He's kind of creepy. But even though he is not a likable character whatsoever, he's just got the women of the Teen Titans, these very young, attractive women, throwing themselves at him and talking about how attractive he is. And it is universally accepted among Teen Titans fans that this was just a self-insert for the writer because he even looked just like the writer and that the writer was just giving himself a girlfriend in the Titans books. So what I'm saying is there's a lot of self-inserts going on and a lot of self-fantasies going on. And now we can get to what is the impetus for me bringing up all of this, is that I'm going through superhero media, I'm watching all this stuff, and we get to X-Men 97 that has recently been released, and I've talked a little bit about this on my review of it, but I love the show. They're doing a great job, and they are very, very accurate to the comics, but they are a little too accurate to it. One of the things that was kind of unexpected to me is that they are adapting this Rogue Magneto relationship that happened in the comics. Now, yes, this did happen in the comics, but let me give you some context. So, Rogue and Magneto are two characters, once again, probably the biggest age gap I've mentioned on this channel so far. Rogue is typically either portrayed as a teenager or a very, very young adult. She is not necessarily one of the more mature characters. Magneto, and while comics can be weird with ages and stuff, he's very typically portrayed as an elderly man. He's a Holocaust survivor. He was very aptly cast as Ian McKellen in the movies, and Rogue very aptly cast as Anna Paquin, at least in terms of age. Now, when Rogue was initially a character introduced in comics, and she was sort of in the vicinity of Magneto, she was not portrayed as the voluptuous Southern girl that we know today. She was actually portrayed as very skinny and kind of gangly, and she was about 18, and she was in the vicinity of with Magneto, so she interacted with him before, but they had absolutely no relationship or any romantic chemistry because they didn't even try to do a relationship when Rogue was portrayed in this way because the characters don't have any inherent chemistry with each other, and there's a massive age gap between them. However, when Jim Lee started drawing Rogue, he was starting to really sexualize the character and draw her very voluptuously. And that is when they all of a sudden did this story arc where Rogue was depowered in the Savage Land and was basically pretty much naked, and where this very iconic cover comes out where she's kind of clutching at Magneto by Jim Lee. And in the actual comic, there actually isn't much between them at all. It's just like this little flash and then it just moves on. It's mainly famous because of the cover. But I've never, like, that's sort of the basis of this relationship in the show, but I've never felt comfortable with these characters because, like I said, I don't believe them together at all, and you've got kind of this massive gap between them, this massive power gap that is unsettling, because if you read that comic, it kind of becomes clear that this was just sort of a power fantasy for the writers, that they just wanted this character who's usually very powerful and usually very independent. Now she's more sexualized than ever. Now she's half naked. Now she's going to clutch at this much, much older, more powerful male character. So I've never liked that. It's like Batman and Batgirl to me. It's like, you shouldn't be going here. Now, the basis is that they try to make for this relationship, and it's come up periodically in comics, is that Magneto used to be a villain, or Rogue used to be a villain, and Magneto is one. But first of all, that never came up when Rogue was not being a sexualized character. Second of all, I don't buy it. Rogue was only a villain in that she tried to take Captain Marvel's powers, Miss Marvel's powers, and that it went wrong. Magneto is a literal terrorist. I don't see that making any romantic chemistry between them. Rogue always becomes, and this is always the key when you can tell a relationship is forced, Rogue always becomes a different character when they try to push this relationship. She always kind of completely lets her guard down for some reason and becomes super, super overly empathetic towards him and just trying to support him and all that. And it just is not her character. She's a lot more suspicious than that. She's a lot more prone to anger than that. But it's periodically, once again, come up in the comics, not really in the 90s. They kind of just let it go there. But it came up in this alternate universe called Age of Apocalypse, where they changed the personalities of the characters, because you can do that because it's an alternate universe. So personality-wise, they seem to fit more together. But in this universe, it was a problem because in this universe, Rogue was essentially Magneto's foster daughter that he eventually married. So you got creepy stuff going on there. And I know no one brought it up at the time, but it was very odd. She was peers with his daughter. She got the powers of Polaris, who is regarded as his daughter. So it was weird stuff then. And then they tried it again later on with a de-aged clone of Magneto. And this time there wasn't an age gap there. But this time they tried the idea, oh, the reason she's attracted to Magneto is because he can actually touch her. And they didn't actually do much for that. Joseph, this de-aged clone of Magneto, just gives her a kiss on the forehead. Apparently his like magnetism powers can do that or something, which makes no sense because in other versions, Rogue can take his powers. So it's always just sporadic based on if the writer wants it or not. But they didn't do anything more than a peck on the forehead, and then she moved on from him and went like back to Gambit after that. And so that was that. And they rightfully let go of this relationship again in mainstream comics until it came up in X-Men Legacy, where all of a sudden you've got Magneto kind of pushing himself on Rogue, and she's not having it, but they're trying to convince that she needs to, that she's kind of like being made to give into it. But importantly, they're not portraying it as a bad thing in those comics, or at least not as I read them. And then finally, nobody liked that. And so finally they got rid of it and they didn't return to it. That ended all the way back in 2011 or 2012. And there's been nothing of that since. And rightfully, it never appeared in other media apart from comics. But now it appears in the animated show, and there's a lot of problems with it because, first of all, they never had that backstory in the original animated show. They never had the Savage Land stuff. Jean is the one who helps Rogue overcome her Carol Danvers personality. They already got that. Rogue and Magneto never even interact in the original show. The only acknowledgement Rogue ever makes of Magneto is at his funeral, where they thought he was dead, where she says she doesn't care that he's dead. She's just worried about Gambit. So the biggest interaction these characters have had before is Rogue saying that she doesn't care that he's dead because they had no relation before.
We have work to do. I know it's related. It ain't Magneto I'm thinking about.
So it is out of nowhere in the show if you're taking it in the context of original X-Men the Animated Series, but it's not something, I understand why they're doing it, because that Jim Lee cover was something very famous. The Age of Apocalypse storyline is something very famous, even though it's an alternate universe, and this is a relationship that has sporadically popped up. But just because I don't like them going here, because once again, this relationship has always been sort of like a Batman and Batgirl thing to me, where you can tell that it came about less because it was actually natural for the characters to go there, but because somebody had a fantasy that they wanted to push. I don't think that the current showrunners of the show are doing that, but I think that that is the basis of the relationship, and that's why it's something that people don't want to see. Now, I'm putting my 2 cents into here because, it's always struck me as a very weird relationship, and I think it makes both characters worse. I think to have the very contrived idea that Magneto can touch her and that Rogue is going with him because he's the only one she can touch, that makes her look really shallow, and it makes it look like the relationship is based off of desperation, and it makes it like Magneto is just taking advantage of this person for being very desperate. And I like both characters as individuals. Rogue is my favorite Marvel character of all time. time. I've waited so long to get more content for her, but I'm upset because all we've gotten from her so far in this otherwise very, very great show is this. And with Magneto, I normally love his character, but I do not like turning him into a dirty old man. I usually like him as a sympathetic villain, or in this case, trying to reform. And maybe going forward they will portray it as a creepy thing. We'll see. But I'm seeing people, reacting to it just like I did when I first found about it in the comics and calling it weird and creepy. And likewise, other people saying you shouldn't judge. You shouldn't judge this. Don't judge this age gap. You know, it's all fun and games and don't judge until Batman and Batgirl meet on the rooftop, They said the same thing about Batman and Batgirl, and look where that went. And I don't want them to do a Magneto Rogue killing joke moment here. That's why I'm getting out in front of it, because I remember how Batman and Batgirl went out of control, and I just want to say, nope, don't go there. And to the comment about, well, it's in the comics. Listen, I appreciate that the people who are doing this show are adhering to the comics. However, the comics also had Charles Xavier creeping on a literal teenage Jean Grey in a panel. They also had Spider-Man making a deal with the devil to absolve his marriage. They had Scott Summers marry a different woman, Madeline Pryor, after he thought Jean Grey was dead. When he found out Jean Grey was alive, he left his wife and child to be with Jean Grey. There are a lot of things in comics that just should not be adapted. And once again, goes back to the Batman Batgirl stuff. People were using the fact that it happened before as precedent. But once again, you can criticize things as being bad, even if they happened before. And I just think that it's important to bring this up because as we go forward with the X-Men, and I honestly think that they are the way forward for the MCU, we should bring up there are certain things that you shouldn't adapt. Yes, X-Men is a soap opera. There's a lot of cheating storylines. There's a lot of love triangles, but not all of them were right. There are things in comics that can stay in comics, and you don't need to adapt them anywhere else. And this relationship is just making Rogue look worse. I'm already seeing people call her just a cheater because she's kind of a thing and kind of not a thing with Gambit in this show. She definitely had a thing with him in the original show. And, people don't like this, and you're really making these very, very popular characters look bad, and that's gonna kind of be unfortunate because this is the first piece of media we've gotten from the X-Men in a long time, and I know younger people are watching it, and so I really hope they don't taint these characters. But my last point I want to make, I know that there's going to be people in the comments screaming at me of this because for some people it's controversial to criticize massive age gaps. I'm talking about a 20-year-old with an 80-year-old in this case, and some people don't like that, but I'm not talking about you. And if you want to write a comment screaming at me, go ahead. It's just going to boost this video on the algorithm and make me more money. I'm just being honest about you there. But I'm making this video for the people out there who do find this relationship creepy. I saw a lot of people say, one of the #1 posts on X-Men Reddit was, am I the only one who finds this relationship creepy every time they do it? And people saying, I love this show except for this one thing. It just really brought it down for me. It's perfectly fine if you find it creepy. I just want to say that. Don't listen to the people saying that you have no right to judge. This is definitely something that you can judge. I still hope that the show handles it well, but I am on my guard. I don't want to be killing joked again. And that's all I got for you guys today. And last thing. Final thing is, it is okay to call out self-insert stuff and fantasies. People have been doing that for years with Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey. You can do that with comics as well. But that is all I have for you guys today. What did you think of this video? Go ahead and scream at me. Thank you, patrons, as always, for supporting me. And I will see you guys with many more views and many more videos in the future. And I will see you guys next time.